Guys, Chris here from Cohesive Friendship Unit. Just me today. I got an NES Classic. I was in line on the 29th, like a lot of you guys, and I managed to pick one up. And I told myself, you're gonna beat a game from start to finish on this little guy. That's gonna be the first thing you do with it. And I settled on Metroid, largely because I actually got a copy of Super Metroid lately. So I figured, why not start with Metroid? And as I was playing it, I realized a lot of kind of similarities to my favorite franchise of all time. That would be Zelda. And it got me thinking, why did Zelda kind of win and Metroid kind of lose? I mean, they both had reasonable starts. Metroid sold about 2.7 million on the NES, and Zelda sold about 6.5 for its first game. They both had spectacular SNES entries, the best, arguably, of the two franchises. And Zelda went on to have Ocarina of Time, one of the best games ever made. And we all know how Samus was represented in the N64 era. Namely, she was a low poly Smash Bros. Player. But I was playing it, I was thinking, hey, this is almost more enjoyable than playing Zelda on the NES. So I kind of wanted to take a look at the game, kind of do some critical analysis on it, and figure out, determine why Metroid got the short end of the stick from Zelda, the Hyrule Adventure. Real quick, if you subscribe to the channel, you are entered to win some Steam codes. Every 50 subscribers, we select a winner at random. Let's get right into it. First thing I want to note, Metroid does not have saves. Zelda does have saves. Obviously, this was a cost-cutting measure by Nintendo, whereas Zelda had the battery pack, Metroid did not. This, I think, severely held the game back. I actually own a hard copy, a physical copy, a cartridge of Metroid for my NES, but I did not actually complete the game until I played it on the NES Mini, and that is entirely because of save states. I did not use them very often, but it was very nice for me to have in the back of my pocket to save right before a hard boss and be able to queue that back up. That is extremely irritating if you are playing the original, unless you know some passcodes that you can use. Not to mention it takes about 5 minutes to enter those passcodes. You are in for a bad time. It is extremely frustrating to die at a boss, have to go back down to 30 health with no energy tanks full, and we'll get to that later, and then have to slog all the way back to the boss, have to spend 10 plus minutes getting, really 15 minutes getting all of your energy filled up. The NES Classic basically rectifies this issue with instant save states anywhere in the game, which is extremely helpful. Next, I want to talk, like I mentioned, about energy mining. Now, in the original Zelda, they had fairy fountains. In the overworld, you could find them, your health would go back to full. And this was extremely helpful because you didn't have to grind for hearts. Unfortunately, in Metroid, there is no such thing as that. And nobody likes to do this forever. It feels like forever. It is dumb. As far as I know, the only way to get full health in this game is to get an energy tank, of which there are a finite amount, and they are kind of few and far between. So there's, I don't know this for a fact, there's like around 5. There might be more, there might be less. There's around 5 energy tanks for your entire playthrough, and they will get you to full health. And if you die, you go back to 30 energy on 0 energy tank, or 30 energy on 1 energy tank. That is completely ridiculous. I don't understand why they could not come up with a better method. And the enemy grinding, honestly, is okay. I understand if there might have been a technical limitation, but maybe they should have, and I get that they have those enemy spawns, but maybe they should have had an enemy that spawns items 100% of the time, because as it stands, the enemies aren't guaranteed to spawn health. I think they should spawn health 100% of the time, and I think they should have those spawn points more often so that you can grind extremely fast. Maybe have them drop the maximum, kind of like how Metroids, if you kill them, drop an insane amount of health, an insane amount of missiles. I think that an easy to kill kind of enemy spread throughout the map would be much, much better, because as it stands, energy tanks are essentially useless unless you find yourself on a roll or you're willing to grind. And next, I want to cut back on the repetition. Zelda 1 has pretty much, I mean, there are some repeating segments, a unique map. There is no reused, or if it is reused, it's extremely well done. You don't necessarily notice it. There's no reused portions of the map. Metroid has a lot of reused portions of the map, and when you're looking at two mazes between Zelda and Metroid, with no actual map, if you have a physical map, that's great. If you owned the Zelda cart in the box, you got a little map. That was extremely helpful. But in Metroid, you don't get that. Well, there is a map in the manual. It is shit. When you're kind of making a cryptic maze, essentially, this is not the way to do things. There should be no repeating rooms, or if there are repeating rooms, they should kind of give at least a different skin or color palette or something to distinguish them. I personally didn't have a huge problem. The way I actually played the game was I played the game and I allowed myself to look at the map when I was not playing the game. I beat the game in 3 sessions. That means when I was doing something else, not playing the game, hours apart from playing the game, I would allow myself to Google the map, look at it, and maybe I could memorize like 1 or 2 things. But as a whole, I did not rely on the map, and I found myself getting stuck a fair number of times. Zelda, not as bad, because all the tiles are more or less distinct. Next, I want to kind of increase the pacing. And I know that you can kind of play the game in a lot of different ways, but this is at least what happened to me. And this is actually going to go into my next point. I pretty much found most of the... I found every item that I needed to beat the game before I beat my first boss, of which there are 3. There are 2 mini bosses, and then there's the final boss. Zelda has 8+ dungeons and bosses. And for me, that is kind of poor pacing. It would kind of be like playing a Zelda game where you find the arrows, the bombs, the boomerang, the raft, everything that you needed before you even went to the first dungeon, and that doesn't work as well. And I get that you can kind of pace things out a little better, but when you're essentially roaming a maze and this is your first time playing it, I feel like the organic flow is not that great, especially, next point, when there's only those 3 bosses. Zelda has so many bosses, and it kind of segues you very fluently. You're never kind of stalling for very long. But Metroid, literally what happened was I beat it in 3 play sessions. My first 2 were getting everything I needed, and my last one was beating all 3 bosses. I think it would have been nice if there was a little bit better pacing and at least one more boss. I think one more boss, an easy boss early on, like that you just run into it. You don't have to really search for it. It's pretty much on the beaten path. I think that would have been a great way to kind of give the player a sense of progress, because as it stands, yeah, it's nice to get all these power-ups, but you don't feel like you're getting anywhere until, for me at least, closer to the end of the game. And it does take a fair amount of items to even get to either of the bosses. You definitely need the morph bombs, and on top of that, I'm pretty sure you need the ice beam and or the high jump to get to Ridley. which, if you don't know what you're doing, could take a while. And the last thing that I think last software-based thing that I think Metroid could use would be a few cryptic hints. I think that would do the game some good, even if they're kind of shit. I'm going back into the 80s and saying, we're back in 1985, 1986, and it's going to be like the original Legend of Zelda, where occasionally you bump into a room with some cryptic hints, and sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they don't mislead you, but they make you scratch your head. I think that kind of helped in Zelda, got people talking, and I think that would do a similar thing in Metroid. And I know that a lot of people think that one of the better parts of Metroid is isolation, but you could find a log or read on the Chozo. Yeah, if every Chozo stone that you found with all the upgrades had some kind of hint, I think that would be nice. That would at least help me when I was playing it, and I think it would help a lot of people back in the day. And the final thing I want to say that I think would have really catapulted Metroid up to the top, and I brushed on it earlier, is that physical map. Zelda had that physical map. It was nice, it was big, and it even had on the other side, the first kind of dungeon, a few extra things. I think Metroid, the map on the manual is absolute garbage, and this would have went a long way. It doesn't even need to be the full map. I would even be fine with the map up until the elevators. Like anytime you go down an elevator, that's not covered in the map, but that would at least give players kind of a helping hand to start, and you wouldn't be lost in the very, very beginning. You wouldn't get lost or frustrated. I've been playing video games for 2 decades, so I think I know Metroid, so I'm a little bit more forgiving, but I think a lot of people would be pretty frustrated early on playing this game. I do want to throw some praise to it, though, and I mentioned this earlier. I think this is more enjoyable than the original Legend of Zelda. I think the platforming is fairly solid. The only real issue that I could think of from like a general gameplay standpoint is it's a little bullshit when you get caught under the lava under like a rock or something, and it's a little dumb that when you're going through doors, enemies can hurt you. I get that there's hardware limitations, but other Nintendo games or NES games didn't have this issue, so don't know if I can give full forgiveness on that. But yeah, I think the actual gameplay, the mechanics have aged better than the original Legend of Zelda, and I think like if there's a lot of imitators out there today, it's the Metroidvania genre. Like Hollow Knight is a new game that is essentially Metroid, where it's a side-scrolling platformer where you explore. And that's not to say that there aren't Zelda kind of clones, top-down Zelda clones, but I think they're fewer and far between. And I think the shooting and the actual augmentation of gameplay is better in Metroid. I think when you get a missile, you can shoot a missile. When you get a morph bomb, you can do the morph bomb. When you get the ice beam, you can freeze enemies. Whereas in Zelda, yeah, you get your arrows, which is a projectile, and your bombs, which is more powerful. But more often than not, you're just kind of doing that four-directional slash, and things like the raft just allow you to go from A to B. They don't actually augment your abilities or augment your gameplay significantly, in my opinion. But that's what I thought. I actually like Metroid a lot. I think it's a great little game. I think people don't give it enough credit. I think it gets overshadowed by Super Metroid. But then again, so does the original Zelda. Let me know what you guys think, though. Do you think Zelda 1 is more fun to play, or the original Metroid? And do you think, what would you kind of change about the original Metroid? Let me know down below, and we will catch you guys next time.